We three kings of Israel, Saul, David, and Solomon. And we are still on Solomon. We are entering 1 Kings chapter 9. My name is Adam, and we are looking at what happens after Solomon builds and dedicates the temple to the Lord. And we'll get right into it, starting in 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 1. As soon as Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house and all that Solomon desired to build, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. And the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your plea, which you have made before me. I have consecrated this house that you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time. And as for you, if you will walk before me as David your father walked, with integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, and keeping my statutes and my rules, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised your father David, saying, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. But if you turn aside from following me, you or your children, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land that I have given them, and the house that I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, and Israel will become a proverb and a byword among all peoples. And this house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done thus to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and laid hold on other gods, and worshipped them, and served them. Therefore the Lord has brought all this disaster on them. So he appears to him again, which is a great thing, especially in this day and time. God appears to you. Think of that. If God appeared to you, not just once, but twice, that might change your entire life, right? Change your entire outlook, your entire way that you do things. I mean, God has appeared to me. I'm going to change everything, right? You would think so. That's not exactly what happened with Solomon. There was a promise there from God. You will have someone on the throne forever as long as you follow me. There was a warning there from God. If you turn away from me, if the people turn away from me, they'll become a byword, and you will not have someone on the throne. This kingdom will be taken away, right? Well, we see what happened in the end. God appears twice to Solomon, and Solomon still doesn't continue with him, at least not into the end. He still has distractions. He still has other things. He loses his focus and turns somewhere else to look at something else. Namely, in his case, it was women, not just women, but foreign women who drew his heart away to other gods. We'll see that in a bit. But as it is right now, 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 10, at the end of 20 years in which Solomon had built the two houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house, and Hiram, king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress, timber and gold as much as he desired. King Solomon gave to Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. But when Hiram came from Tyre to see the cities that Solomon had given him, they did not please him. Therefore he said, what kind of cities are these that you have given me, my brother? So they are called the land of Kabul to this day. Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Now, that name, Kabul, can mean like sterile and not limited, just not a very good use is basically what he's saying. He's saying these cities, there's not a whole lot I can do with them. What have you given to me? So that's what the land's name became, and that's what it's called to the day of the writing of 1 Kings chapter 9. And then Hiram sent to the king 120 talents of gold. That's what he had sent to him, right? And he had done a lot of work with him, and they were friends, and you'd think that, there'd be a little bit better. Verse 15, and this is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon drafted to build the house of the Lord and his own house at the Millo, and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer and burned it with fire, and had killed the Canaanites who lived in the city, and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon rebuilt Gezer and Lower Beth-horon, and Baalath and Tamar in the wilderness in the land of Judah, and all the store cities that Solomon had, and the cities for his chariots, and the cities for his horsemen, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. All the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not of the people of Israel, their descendants who were left after them in the land, whom the people of Israel were unable to devote to destruction, these Solomon drafted to be slaves, and so they are to this day, the day of the writing. But of the people of Israel, Solomon made no slaves. They were the soldiers. They were his officials, his commanders, his captains, his chariot commanders, and his horsemen. These were the chief officers who were over Solomon's work, 550 who had charge of the people and carried on the work. But Pharaoh's daughter went up from the city of David to her own house that Solomon had built for her. Then he built the Millo. 3 times a year, Solomon used to offer up burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar that he built to the Lord, making offerings with it before the Lord, so he finished the house. King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent out, I don't know how to pronounce it. Hiram sent with the fleet his servants, seamen who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon. And they went to Ophir and brought from there gold and 420 talents, and they brought it to King Solomon. And now we're moving on into chapter 10. So basically what we get from chapter 9 is a couple of different things. There is this account of just the various things that Solomon had done, the things that he had built, the forced labor. That comes into play later. We learn that it wasn't just simple forced labor, but it was pretty harsh labor that Solomon had subjected them to. The temple and Solomon's own house, they were built with slave labor. We do know, or at least it seems from earlier what we've read, is that they would work for 1 month and then they'd have 2 months off. Forced labor for 1 month, 2 months off. But what we're going to find out is that it was very hard labor that they were doing at the time. And now we're moving in to chapter 10. Chapter 10, starting in verse 1. Now when the queen of Sheba heard the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. And Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his cupbearers, and his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more breath in her. She was completely awestruck and taken aback. Verse 6, and she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your words and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came, and my own eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Your wisdom and prosperity surpass the report that I heard. Happy are your men, happy are your servants who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he has made you king, that you may execute justice and righteousness. Remember, Solomon prayed that the temple and Israel would be a light to other nations and draw other nations toward God, right? And that they would see Israel, they would see the temple, and they would see God and recognize him. This is what's happening right now with the Queen of Sheba. And she's saying, absolutely, blessed be the Lord your God who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. And she recognizes the Lord loves Israel forever. He has made you king that you may execute justice and righteousness. She recognizes God. God is glorified because of Israel. This is the intent. This is God's intent with us today as the church, is to glorify himself, bring others to him, bring the world to him through the church. How does that happen? Well, Christ made it pretty clear when he told his disciples, by this they will know that you are my disciples, that your theology is accurate. No, that doesn't seem right. I don't think that's what it was. By you following all the rules correctly. No, that doesn't seem accurate either. That's right. By this they will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. By the love we have for each other, people will know that we follow Christ and they'll be attracted to that. In this case, obviously, God had given amazing things and amazing blessings to Solomon, but there had to have been the wisdom there and the love for Solomon as well that was very attractive to the Queen of Sheba in this case. Moving on to verse 11. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought from Ophir a very great amount of almug wood and precious stones. So, hold on a second. We're in verse 10. I just skipped a verse. I'm going to go back and read that again now. So we just finished verse 9, that you may execute justice and righteousness. Verse 10, then she, the Queen of Sheba, gave the king 120 talents of gold and a very great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again came such abundance of spices as these that the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought from Ophir a very great amount of almug wood and precious stones. And the king made of the almug wood supports for the house of the Lord and for the king's house. I don't know what kind of wood almug wood is, but if you know, let me know. Also lyres and harps for the singers. No such almug wood has come or been seen to this day. Maybe that's why I don't know what it is. And King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba all that she desired, whatever she asked, besides what was given to her by the bounty of King Solomon. So she turned and went back to her own land with her servants. Remember, Solomon was a lover of women. He loved women. He loved foreign women. We'll see that. I say remember, but we're yet to read that passage, but we will read it and we'll see that was eventually his downfall. Verse 14 of 1 Kings 10. Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Besides that which came from the explorers and from the businesses of the merchants and from all the kings of the west and from the governors of the land. So Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield. And he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a very great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps. The throne had a round top, and on each side of the seat were armrests and 2 lions standing beside the armrests, while 12 lions stood there, one on each end of a step on the 6 steps. The like of it was never made in any kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. Silver was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. Excuse me again. Remember this next time you read Ecclesiastes. And when Solomon is talking about his extravagances, his abundances, the things that he pursued and sought after, all the parties and everything else that he had, this is the kind of stuff he's talking about. I mean, everything being of such opulence, with all the gold, and the gold, he only drank from golden vessels, and silver was counted as nothing, right? Goodness. Verse 22, for the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the fleet of ships at Tarshish used to come bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Okay, wow. Thus, King Solomon excelled at all the things of the earth in riches and in wisdom. And the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought his present, articles of silver and gold, garments of myrrh, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. And the king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and he made cedar as plentiful as the sycamore of the Shephelah. And Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kuwait, and the king's traders received them from Kuwait at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150, and so through the king's traders they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. So not only did they take them, but they also exported them to other nations as well. However, we're going to get into chapter 11 here a little bit. All of this grandiose and wonderful opulence, and yet it does not end on a positive note. Chapter 11, verse 1, Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. As wise as Solomon was, God was wiser, and Solomon did not heed this advice. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made sacrifices, or who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods. From what I understand, especially of Molech, and quite possibly for these other ones, Molech was one that they would sacrifice their children to, their babies. They would burn them in the fire. There is at least one report, maybe more reports out there, that as they would burn and the heat would literally start melting them, it was almost like it turned their face into a smile of some sort. They would party while this was going on. And not just party, hey, let's go drink and have a good time. They would do other things altogether. We won't really get into all that. I would say use your imagination, but please don't. They would have just these evil, it's no wonder they're called abominations. Let's just put it that way. The things that they would do at this time. And this is what Solomon was drawn into by his love for foreign women. I think it's very important to understand that and to note that. He didn't just like women. He didn't just look at women. He wasn't even like this womanizer, so to speak, but he loved foreign women. It would be something that we may even excuse people for, because if you have that kind of a love for them, if you cling to them in love, maybe you think, at least he loves them, and they're consenting adults, so whatever, they can do what they want. God says no, because they're drawing your heart away. And they did. They drew his heart away to other gods. Let's look in 1 Kings 11, verse 9 now. And the Lord was angry with Solomon. I'd say so, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord commanded. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, Since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hands of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David my servant and for the sake of Jerusalem that I have chosen. Always seems to be a remnant, right? No matter how dire the situation is, no matter how godless society seems to be, God always seems to hold that remnant back for himself. And there's always that little bit of hope, that little glimmer of light that can grow and burn again into a large fire. Verse 14, and the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal house in Edom. For when David was in Edom, and Joab the commander of the army went up to bury the slain, he struck down every male in Edom. For Joab and all Israel remained there 6 months, until he had cut off every male in Edom. Deliberate act, obviously. Wow. But Hadad fled to Egypt, together with certain Edomites of his father's servants, Hadad still being a little child. They set out from Midian and came to Paran, and took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him an allowance of food and gave him land. Remember, Pharaoh is who? Solomon's father-in-law. And Hadad found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage to the sister of his own wife, the sister of Tahpenes, the queen. And the sister of Tahpenes bore him Genubath, his son, whom Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Moses was in that same situation, wasn't he? But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab the commander of the army was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Let me depart, that I may go to my own country." But Pharaoh said to him, "What have you lacked with me, that you are now seeking to go to your own country?" And he said to him, "Only let me depart." God also raised up as an adversary to him, to Solomon, Rezon, the son of Eliada, who'd fled from his master Hadadezer, king of Zobath. And he gathered men about him and became leader of a marauding band after the killing by David. And they went to Damascus and lived there and made him king in Damascus. It's kind of a alternate David timeline, right? He was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon, doing harm as Hadad did, and he loathed Israel and reigned over Syria. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Zeradah, a servant of Solomon, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also lifted his hand up against the king. And this was the reason why he lifted his hand against the king. Solomon built the Millo and closed up the breach of the city of David his father. The man Jeroboam was very able, and when Solomon saw that the young man was industrious, he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. And at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite, found him on the road. Now Ahijah had dressed himself in a new garment, and the two of them were alone in the open country. Then Ahijah laid hold of the new garment that was on him and tore it in 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10 pieces. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and will give you 10 tribes. But he will have 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. Because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of Moab, and Milcom, the god of the Ammonites, and they have not walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight, and keeping my statutes and my rules, as David his father did. Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him ruler all the days of his life, for the sake of David my servant, whom I chose, who kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, and will give it to you, 10 tribes. Yet to his son I will give 1 tribe, that David my servant may always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen to put my name. And I will take you, and you will reign over all that your soul desires. You will be king over Israel. And if you will listen to all that I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you and will build you a sure house, as I built for David. And I will give Israel to you, and I will afflict the offspring of David because of this, but not forever. We know how that story turned out. The kings of Israel never were good, never followed those commands. Verse 40, Solomon sought therefore to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam arose and fled into Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, and all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the acts of Solomon? And in the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. And Solomon slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. That's where we'll pick up next time. But notice this. What was Solomon ultimately punished for? It was, again, his lack of faith. Same thing Saul was punished for. It was not all the abundance of women that he had, not for being a womanizer. That could carry its own punishment, and does. It carries its own very real and physical consequences. But as far as the punishment God brought on him, it was for turning his heart away from God. May we keep that in mind, no matter what goes on, no matter what sins we are attracted to. Let's confess our sins. He's faithful and just to forgive us our sins, cleanse us from all unrighteousness, and let's turn back to him. And let's keep our hearts turned toward God, for sure. Next time, we're going to read about Rehoboam and where the forced labor kind of came back on Solomon's head, or at least the head of his son. But we'll leave that for next time.